This is the fictional Mindbender. This was a question that came to mind when watching a YouTube channel, Tales of the Rings, remake of the Silmarillion covering the rise of Morgoth. Who was the more evil, Morgoth or Darth Sidious? I actually took to asking groups online this question to get their input on it because I was really fascinated by it. This is because both characters are considered the ultimate evil in their respective universes. Morgoth in the universe of Tolkien and Middle-earth, who is the original Dark Lord, and Darth Sidious, who's probably more famous because he is the Sith Lord who controls Darth Vader and the rest of the galaxy throughout the Star Wars franchise. So, to the Middle-earth uninitiated, Morgoth, like I said, is the original Dark Lord in Tolkien's writings, corrupting the world during its creation and constantly wrecking the works of his peers, the Valar, in shaping and creating it, creating massive wars that result in the imperfect world that we all know it for today. He was responsible for either creating everything evil in that universe, or that he set the seeds up so that evil was eventually going to happen to many of the races. This includes everything from orcs and dragons to the raising of giant mountains and desert regions that made it just hard to live. Either way, his narcissistic and personal ambitions basically inhibit the inhabitants of Middle-earth from reaching their ultimate potential. And he is also responsible for the corruption and turning of one particular character, Sauron, whom we also know today mainstream as the current Dark Lord that's associated with the Lord of the Rings in the Third Age. And if you're familiar with the movies, that's the big armored guy or the giant flaming eyeball. So I was curious about this because both fictional characters make long-lasting and very powerful shockwaves that long outlast how long the characters exist in those universes, and as well as just being outrageously overpowered beings that almost seem to run roughshod over every other character in their respective universes. Since I think Star Wars is the more mainstream of the two franchises, I won't go too much into Darth Sidious because essentially we all know who he is. The real question though revolves around not the power scaling, since Melkor, or Morgoth, because he actually has two names, is pretty much an angelic being that existed before time, and Palpatine is basically still a human being, just a really powerful and evil one, is I think how is the definition of evil itself defined? What are the parameters that we're going to basically rate or judge that? Or, to rephrase it simply, what makes these characters become so reprehensible and awful that they are spoken of in such god-tier disgust and fear by other good guy characters? This is a tough question because it's a rabbit hole, but I'm going to avoid that by staying just within the fictional context and away from any real-life theological questions that may arise. So the Carfax for Melkor is that he was an angelic being corrupted because he wanted to make things in his own image and desires apart from the ruling god of that universe. In the book The Silmarillion, it says that he initially wanted to do this out of good intentions, but implies that he spent too much time alone in isolation, searching for the ability to create life, which eventually twists Melkor to the point where when the world is first formed, he goes in there with the intention of making it his own kingdom, a place where he can be free to be the god there, making life as he wished and being worshipped by said life. In accordance with this narcissism, he pollutes, corrupts, and destroys much of what the rest of the Valar had originally had planned, the perfect paradise, or Eden, if you will, making the ideal world that the true God wanted to make corrupted. And Melkor does this multiple times over, before he is finally stopped and Middle-earth can finally be formed, albeit not as perfect as it should have been. Everyone and everything that Melkor talks to or touches becomes twisted and corrupted. And this happens with multiple characters and among multiple races throughout his time in Middle-earth during the first stage of that world. But beyond just polluting and corrupting creation itself, Melkor is responsible for nurturing the evil within Sauron, who also initially started out good like Melkor, but ended up becoming a sadistic psychopath who eventually replaces him when Melkor, or Morgoth, however you want to refer to him as, is defeated, and essentially carries out Morgoth's legacy, although for his own reasons, throughout the next couple of ages until what we see him in Lord of the Rings movies as being defeated finally with the destruction of the One Ring. All this was started long ago by Melkor, so that's pretty heavy. And definitely evil, so it's going to be hard to see how Palpatine competes with that, since Melkor's actions span before the beginning of time in that universe itself. So then, what does Palpatine bring to this table of evil? Well, since we're not going with the whole power scaling aspect, that makes this a little bit easier, since if we did, it would also depend on which version of Palpatine we would go with, the Disney or non-Disney version. That said, Palpatine is stated as not only being narcissistic, but a true sociopath as well, having zero empathy for others. There is nothing he wanted or did for the good of others, but only himself. And it's only increased as he got older, got into politics, and came under the apprenticeship of one Darth Plagueis. He murdered his own family in his quest for power, and became the greatest manipulator that the galaxy had not ever seen. Other than his disgustingly overpowered force potential, Palpatine's greatest ability was that he was able to get others to do what he wanted without them even knowing about it. Having spent literal decades planning out the rise of the Sith under his leadership via the Clone Wars, a conflict that had affected an already corrupt and weakened galaxy, and his greatest accomplishment, manipulating and causing the downfall of one Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one of Jedi lore, and then using said new apprentice to virtually wipe out the Jedi from existence for over the next 20 years, almost ending their millennia spanning feud. They are incredible feats. Moreover, Palpatine literally swapped out one army for another right after the Clone Wars. That's millions of soldiers by manipulating circumstances where he could legitimately do so in the eyes of the public without looking like the monster that he actually was. Palpatine sponsored projects of terror like the Death Stars and a massive fleet buildup, all while convincing half the galaxy that they were in good hands and oppressing the other half without the other side even knowing about it. And ultimately, his legacy would have ramifications throughout that galaxy and franchise for the next 60 more years. So, who is the more evil? So at first, I would think it was Melkor, since he's been at it longer via his immortality, and that his intentions and actions directly affected an entire world physically, and the countless millions of lives who inhabited it, as well as corrupting the plan for perfection that was initially intended. This is literally like Satan fucking up God's plans and then claiming credit for it. Not that this is a good thing, but you get the idea. It's a major accomplishment that not everyone can lay claim to. Yet there's another standout to me besides these extraordinary feats. Nearly all of them involve direct interaction on Melkor's part. If you consider the book Morgoth's Ring as canon for Tolkien's universe, then Melkor could have only corrupted creation itself by investing a great portion of his native being and power into the material world. Palpatine, on the other hand, while certainly having bloody hands, got others to do the work for him for most of his reign, from his rise to power as Chancellor to eventual Emperor of the Galaxy and the Empire. Accomplishes all this by getting others to take the lives of others via assassinations, the Clone Wars, and beyond. Palpatine rarely gets directly involved to get messy, even though when he does, he still looks fucking spotless doing it because he's just that damn good a manipulator of circumstances and people. And moreover, anyone who does happen to know when Palpatine directly involves himself as Darth Sidious is either already in on the whole thing or is already dead. And all of this just multiplies and gets more impressive as his power increases in the dark side of the Force, to the point where the novel of Revenge of the Sith describes Darth Sidious as being pretty much a black void within the Force itself, and the ultimate embodiment of the dark side. But perhaps the most important factor for me, though, is that Melkor originally started out as pure with good intentions. Tolkien has been noted for the belief that evil is not born but made, and this plays out in all of his quote-unquote evil or corrupted characters. Melkor, Sauron, Fëanor, the Balrogs, various mortals, all started out as not being evil at heart, but in one way or another become that or commit acts that are considered evil even if their own personalities are more gray. Palpatine, though, is just bad from the start. The song Bad to the Bone absolutely describes this person to a T. He is a natural-born killer for his own ends and only got better/worse at it by getting others to do it for him. And while he clearly does not have the longevity or power scale that Melkor does, though, side note, the Force itself is very hard to measure to begin with anyway, his intentions and the ways that he accomplishes them are what defines him. Even Tolkien says that evil looks fair but smells fouler. So for me, I would have to say that Emperor Palpatine is the more evil of the two characters. But if you happen to disagree with that, or want to add any more comments to that, please feel free to comment below. And otherwise, if you're curious about any other perspectives on Middle-earth exclusive characters, I also have a second channel called the Middle-earth Philosopher that you can find in the link below. But otherwise, fictional mindbender, and you guys have a good day.